Good morning and happy Legalization Day, Michigan. I'm Amy Biocchini. I'm the marijuana beat reporter with MLive.com. I'm here at Vehicle City Social Club in Flint with Jamie Lowell. He's one of the authors of Proposal 1, the law that's taking effect today, legalizing marijuana for adults age 21 and over. So Jamie helped write the law, and he's on the board of MLive. And you might know him from Third Coast Dispensary in Ypsilanti. So welcome, Jamie.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for being here. How are you feeling today?
Today is a celebratory day, and I feel like it. So pretty good.
Celebrating already?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I hope many people are today, because today is special.
Yeah, it's definitely a historic day. Proposal 1, which is now the Michigan Regulation and Taxation of Marijuana Act, takes effect today, and it took many decades of cannabis activism to get here.
Many people over many years
definitely
were responsible for this.
Right. I mean, Hash Bash has been happening in Ann Arbor since the 70s, and that's rolled up to today. So the Proposal 1 passed with like 56% of the vote in Michigan. Were you surprised to hear that number when the
That
vote
was
passed?
on the lower end of what I thought it was going to be. I mean, it was nearly 57%. Some of the polling was low 60s, some of it was mid 50s or so, and of course there's always the little plus and minuses. So I thought it would be on the higher end of that, but it turned out to be right in there. So it was to be expected, but I kind of thought we'd hit the 60 mark instead of the high 50s. But anything over 50 works for me.
Right.
So we're all good.
Absolutely. So what is legal today that was not legal yesterday?
Okay, well today the law went into effect. So adults 21 and over can grow, use cannabis, possess cannabis, and pass it around.
And what's still illegal?
There are limits to what adults can do. There's 12 plants per primary residence, no matter how many adults are in the house. There's certain amounts that are allowed to have people are allowed to have in possession while out and about or at the house. 2.5 ounces while out and about, 10 ounces of products or whatever may have been harvested from the personal garden at the house. So there are limits, and those limits are exceeded, then certain penalties could kick in, starting from civil infractions into criminal penalties.
Sure, but certainly a whole set of new personal freedoms.
Yeah, it's big. I mean, it's a total change in how we've been doing things, and in our opinion, a much more sensible approach, of course.
Certain things are still illegal, like consuming marijuana in public is still illegal. You have to consume it in the privacy of your own home or
in a private place. Such as right here.
Such as right here, where medical card-carrying patients consume and have been consuming for some time. And also driving under the influence is still illegal.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Right?
Nothing was changed with that, with our law. If somebody cannot drive properly, they ought not. And police should do their jobs and get those people off the road.
Right.
We did not alter anything as far as we did not make any allowances for people to drive under the influence by this law at all.
Right. So let's talk about where you can buy marijuana. Can you buy marijuana in Michigan today as an adult?
No, only patients and caregivers under the MMFLA can make those types of purchases, or the transfer from the primary caregiver to the directly connected patients. The state has a year to promulgate rules for the businesses and the commercial activity, and then thereafter the stores will start operating, and then those purchases can be made. So it'll be a while before retail purchases for adults 21 and over for personal use will take place, but it's in motion now.
Absolutely. So right now, if you are looking for marijuana, you can get it as a gift. That's allowable under the law, but that's about it. So retail sales, like you said, will take about a year to take place.
Sure.
So we are taking questions on our Facebook Live, and I see we've got some coming in already, which I totally appreciate. So one of them we have is, how does this affect me as a medical patient? Should medical patients keep their cards?
I believe there are advantages for a medical patient to keep their card. One is the taxes are not applied to medical users. and there will be a 10% excise tax plus sales tax at point of sale at these retail stores.
Recreational.
And the existing 3% tax will no longer be applied either.
To medical.
To the medical purchases now. So for that reason alone, it's worth it. There probably are some other protections, maybe depending on how things work out with the driving thing. Patients are allowed to have internal possession, and even if they are, positive or whatever, that is, that is something that won't lead to criminality potentially. So there are definitely, I think, some surface reasons and maybe even some deeper reasons for people to keep their cards. And I like the idea of demonstrating that there's still medical benefits here, and these places should be appeasing that part of the market and offering up those products that people using for medical benefit would need to use.
Absolutely. Yeah, the excise tax for local communities who get revenue or will be getting revenue from medical marijuana is set to phase out in March, and that's a provision under the Medical Marijuana Facilities Licensing Act. So yeah, there will be some changes in tax revenue, and also, the only businesses right now licensed to sell are medical. So if you rely on certain kinds of products, it is definitely advantageous to you as a patient to keep your card and continue to go to those places, which are going through their own challenges with licensing, of course. But
it's all new, and with that comes lots of challenges and changes, and having to shuck and jive a little bit to get things implemented. But we are in motion now.
Are you familiar? We have a question here. If someone's consuming marijuana in public, is there a fine? I believe there definitely are penalties because it remains illegal, but I don't think they are considerable.
It's a civil infraction ticket, $100 fine maybe.
Okay, yeah, we can check that.
That can be checked, but it's in that range. It's not a major crime or anything like that. I mean, people should be responsible, not do it, not impose themselves on people. I mean, I hope not much changes, and there's not this influx of like inappropriate flaunting of these new laws or something like that. I think we're all fairly responsible for the most part. Celebrate a little bit, of course. Today's great. December 5th, maybe 1933, I'm not positive on that, alcohol prohibition was lifted here. And so now December 6th, 2018, we're lifting prohibition on cannabis. And, a little celebration for today is perfectly appropriate.
Interesting that it's all happening in December. Let's see, what are some of our other questions that are coming in? What is considered public consumption? There's another good question about public consumption.
Yeah, there's probably some lines there. I mean, there's some very obvious things that are public consumption: walking down the street on the sidewalk, being out in open places where other people have access to, and that type of stuff. But there could be questions and challenges about somebody being on their porch, where they can easily be seen and smelled and heard, and as if they were close enough to what the public can interact with, and there might be some questions along those lines legally of where public starts and private ends, or vice versa. So I would be careful with that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Absolutely. Make sure you're in a private spot. I mean, use filtration systems are cheap and easy these days. If they help to keep a neighbor from worrying about what's going on, then utilize that stuff. Be responsible.
Right. When it comes to the slew of marijuana products that are out there, are you talking about vape pens and vape cartridges?
Well, mainly for smoking. I mean, the vape stuff does have a little essence in the air for a short time, but it's steam and it dissipates quickly. Smoke is heavier and has more of the particulate and tends to hang around and keep its presence for a while. So those people are smoking, which is a common method of delivery. It can be smelled a lot more easier, and if somebody has an issue with it, you can do things to appease that, so it doesn't have to be an issue, an ongoing issue.
Sure. And as long as we're talking about public consumption, we should mention about use and possession on school property, on K-12 school property. That's
prohibited.
Illegal, right. So that's definitely a public place where you will face maybe a different penalty.
And there are some federally controlled areas too, that maybe some parks, maybe some buildings and things like that probably would be under the federal jurisdiction, and it still remains legal federally.
Right, which means a lot of college campuses across Michigan have reminded students and staff that it is still a controlled substance federally, and since they take federal money and grants, that their policies about zero tolerance aren't changing. So I think it will be interesting to see how that all moves forward. But today we're talking about Michigan. Let's see. So let me check my questions. So let's talk about growing marijuana at home, because that's definitely a provision in the law. You're allowed to have 12 plants at home. It's a provision that some of the lame duck legislation might try to change. But talk to me about what you're allowed to do at home with your 12 plants and how they have to be stored.
Okay, so the by right, by the enactment of this law, adults 21 and over can grow up to 12 plants in their primary residence. In order to do that, in order to grow any number of plants, there does have to be the proper space and the proper resources to do that. So always, no matter what, those things have to be there. Maybe somebody might choose to grow less because of space, or just not wanting to take on the extra time or energy. But once somebody has an adequate scenario with which to do it, they can just do that by right. Even if the locals choose to opt out, as we've been discussing, that's only for businesses. The individual rights move on. So, and then whatever is harvested can be kept, but things more than 10 ounces that were achieved from gifts from other people or from stores or things like that, and what was harvested from the personal garden has to be kept secured in a separate area, save for those 10 ounces. And so that's the bottom line. People now have the right to do that, and if they have the proper resources at their house, they can get going on that, or they can upgrade electrical or build out space or whatever they need to do, as long as it's within proper local codes and that type of stuff.
Sure. And can you grow inside or outside?
You can grow outside, but there are stipulations for it not being able to be seen from the road or from the neighbor's house, and it has to be adequately secured and some other things. And inside for sure, but again, should be done safely with proper resources and make sure that the electrical is good enough, and whatever the setup is conducive for that type of operation. And most people get advice, and most people are aware in the fact that it's legal and can be discussed. I think there'll be less and less people having improper, unsafe gardens.
So when it comes to starting your own grow operation, where could you turn to find plants or seeds?
Now people who possess those can take them and hand them over to other people who are 21. And so people will be getting their genetics to grow in that manner. There are still, people do order them online, but there are still legal issues with having things shipped internationally or nationally. So to avoid that would probably be a good idea, less risky, and stick with the adults who have some who are willing to pass them over to you.
So you kind of have to know somebody to get started.
Sure,
yeah.
but we've had medical in this state for years, and there's some of that activity has gone on, and there are ways and means. Come to a private club, maybe like this one, where you can talk to people who are involved. You might be able to find some information that way.
Yeah, I've definitely had lawyers tell me that if you want to continue to supply yourself with recreational marijuana, since the retail program in Michigan is will be so slow to launch, that it might be advantageous just to grow your own. But of course, there's challenges with that. It's not necessarily easy, and there's a whole process. Right,
you have to develop a little passion and be prepared for the work, but it's really rewarding. Some people take it on as a craft or a hobby, and really get some therapeutic rewards from that. Many of the grow stores I know are putting together packages to help new growers for small hobby-like operations, and just to make it easy, they offer a lot of great advice for what the conditions should be, and what we discussed before, how the electrical should be able to handle certain things, and you can get a lot of the proper equipment and the proper advice through a lot of the grow stores as well.
Absolutely. Let's check on our questions. So when it comes to tenants, what kind of rights do tenants have? Can landlords, I guess, determine what happens?
Yeah, because it's my understanding the current state law requires landlords to specifically allow for the activity and what activity that they're okay with. I think that pertains mainly to growing and to smoking. I don't believe it goes so far as to say somebody couldn't have an edible or something like that in their house, but things that could potentially be an issue for the physical structure, smoking inside of it, growing inside of it, stuff like that. I believe that you need the permission from the person who owns or manages the property before you can do that. I'd like to think a lot of people are going to specifically have cannabis-friendly places to rent in order to accommodate that market that certainly exists.
Yeah. It's my understanding that landlords could prohibit smoking.
Sure.
In any form.
Smoking and cultivation.
And cultivation. Yeah, but other than that, you can certainly do other things.
Yeah, I think that the vape we discussed is the steam that dissipates. I think some people intertwine that with smoking, and sometimes there's some questions as to how that works. So that probably has to be conclusively decided by somebody at some point. But steam should not be considered similar to smoke, in my opinion. But things don't always get rational decisions when these are considered. So we probably have to go through little things like that until it all gets worked out.
Okay, I'm going to take some more questions.
Sure.
So we have a question. Can you talk about the difference in cannabis types and strains? I know that the main ones are indica and sativa, and then there's a hybrid. Can you talk about the effects that come from the different types?
Yeah, well, I mean, generally, and I don't mean to be the ultimate authority on this, but I mean, the headline is, there's the cannabinoid profile with THC, CBD, and CBN, and some other things. And there's a supporting cast of like flavonoids and terpenes, and sometimes call them the entourage things, and they all work synergistically to produce a particular effect, and then that works with each individual's unique system, and then provides an effect. And so oftentimes it requires like using the product to determine what the effect is for the individual. And so the different types of cannabis, contain these various combinations of components that produce these effects.
Yeah. What do you like to use?
I'm pretty good. I mean, I with like almost anything. I like cannabis. I like many of the delivery systems. I eat it. I smoke it.
Okay.
I vaporize it.
Yeah.
And I get benefits and enjoyment from all of those things. Ultimately, I just like to smoke joints.
Yeah. Okay. I guess what I was looking for was more like indica. I've heard it gives you a certain kind of high.
I'm not convinced.
Really
Here's a discussion that goes on out in the world of cannabis. I'm not convinced that you get much information from calling something indica or sativa or a hybrid.
Yeah.
I think that there's like different things in each plant, and they work in a certain way, and they work with the individual in a certain way, and it requires using it. And there's variations on those themes. Typically, there are some sativas that knock people out as if it were the commonly described indica or something like that. So I think the best thing to do is for somebody to try it and not try it because somebody calls it something or another, and see if it works for you.
Sure. Okay, I'll take another question. How does the new law affect paraphernalia? Like, can you have a smoking apparatus on your person without getting harassed too much by police?
Yeah, this might not be as conclusive, as it could be, but I don't think we addressed paraphernalia in the act. And I think a lot of local places have certain policies about that, and so they could be a misdemeanor, and there could be somebody between 18 and 21 who might get a civil infraction for having some cannabis, but might be subject to the misdemeanor, and depending on how somebody might want to enforce that could be an issue. I mean, those things are hanging out there, but the spirit of this is to basically allow it and for it not to be a big deal, and of course you need paraphernalia to facilitate using it. And so hoping the thought evolves that people don't think like, well, I'm going to give you a misdemeanor for that because I can, or something. So there could be these little quirks out there, but generally you need the paraphernalia to use the cannabis, and and that should be like the functional way it gets interpreted.
Right. Let's see. So let's talk about going to work. So today, does the new law mean that your employer has to change their drug testing policy?
Nothing changes about what the employer's rights are because of this law. Somebody does not have the ability to step into work and expect to be protected. If it's still an issue for the employer, then it's still an issue for the employer. There's probably 1.3, 1.4 estimated users in Michigan. we'll all have to navigate through that issue. We're not expecting a huge influx in users just because we legalized today. And so hopefully we don't see a major issue break out over it. But what we have seen is an evolution of thought, I think, with a lot of employers on a federal and a statewide level, and understanding that it's probably not that big of a deal, and that to open up particularly when other medications and alcohol, not while on work and things like that are tolerated, that you maybe artificially shrink the talent pool to choose from if you're going to worry about if somebody uses cannabis or not. So hopefully that continues, and a lot of things need to kind of evolve as this gets started, I think, to satisfy all the potential of where we could really go, and it should fit in with what society is generally comfortable with and how it works, the nature.
Yeah.
And we'll get there.
Of course, there definitely are employers who probably will not change their drug policies from zero tolerance until things change at the federal level.
Yeah.
Like I said before, with like federal contractors.
Case for many things, right? Exactly.
Right.
And that will remain a consideration for those who are seeking employment. You may have to choose whether or not to stay in a position where you don't show up dirty on a test, in order to have a particular job. And I hope that comes to an end someday, but that's the reality right now.
Right. Let's see. I'm gonna take some more questions. Let's go to this one. So for recreational users, what kind of edibles and products are available right now to medical patients that they could maybe see in the future in a retail environment?
Well, some things are very specific
Yeah.
for medical use. I mean, for example, there could be a CBD-based suppository. And I doubt too many recreational users are going to jump in and get excited about, buying that product.
Suppositories, yes.
but there'll be a lot of crossover. I mean, there are some ways the medibles play out where the amount of usable material is higher because somebody who's using for a specific medical benefit may need to take a lot at once for something, and somebody may be using more for more personal reasons or not, requiring such an intense amount, could take smaller amounts and build up to whatever that person chooses, to how to use the medicine. So that might happen.
Yeah.
But generally the products, I mean, I think a lot of versions of them are going to, there'll be flour, there'll be the oils and the concentrates, and the infused products. They'll be the same things. I mean, of course, there'll be some very, very medically concentrated products that should remain there because people need them and use them and benefit from them. So, but generally, there'll be a lot of crossover. And we like to say, whenever somebody uses cannabis, there's some kind of a benefit from it just by its nature. So, some people need some more specific use, and some people are okay, like myself, where I can kind of get really good benefit from many different ways of using cannabis.
Yeah, and the state just issued some regulations regarding concentrations, right, of the THC in medical products, and I guess we'd expect to see similar regulations come out throughout the next year.
Yeah, and it was done in a way that makes sense too. That's what I add, because the concentrations are high enough that somebody can get the amounts that they need at once through the way that they've done that. And so that makes sense for the medical users for sure.
Right. And in other states where marijuana's been legalized, the medical products, some of them are still offering higher concentrations or more potent amounts of THC than the recreational products. So there's another, I guess, reason why you might not want to trash your medical card if that's beneficial, like you said, for specific products. Let's see. So this is a good question. So if somebody who lives in Ohio or Indiana today, can they come into Michigan and buy marijuana?
As far not under this new law yet, until the retail stores get licensed and they start operating, over a year from now.
Right, there's no place to buy it.
But we are a reciprocal state for medical. So if you're a medical patient for another state, some of the stores are honoring that. So that's possible under that situation. But those people 21 and over could come here and get gifted some, and possess some, and use some.
They just can't leave with it.
Right.
It has to stay here.
That would be bad.
You
Hopefully we get
with
over
the
all that
crime.
too. Though. I mean, the more states that go, the more chance we have of going federally. And there's some really forward-thinking people in federal government now on this issue. And so hopefully all these things just keep moving in the right direction. We'll solve all these issues over time.
How far away do you think federal legalization is? Everyone has a different answer.
I don't know. I thought we were going to be close a couple times. I thought maybe even a couple of years ago they might deschedule or at least take it off Schedule 1.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say, but I know that we're heading in the right direction. It's going to happen. It's the right things need to line up, and it will happen.
I mean, how significant is it that Michigan's the first state in the Midwest?
It's very significant. We discuss that definitely all the time, and
yeah.
we're inspiring other states. Illinois is talking about it very heavily right now.
Mm-hmm.
Ohio, of course, is starting a medical program, but
Right.
I bet it's not too long before they're talking about getting involved with this as well.
Mm-hmm.
Canada, of course, surrounding us.
Right, in October, right? That law took effect.
Yeah.
So what do you think? Have you been to Hash Bash before?
Yes, been to Hash Bash and participated in them, many of them, and
What do you think it's going to look like in April?
it's going to be great. It's going to be the best Hash Bash. There's going to be, first of all, a lot of great people are kind of putting it together, and I'm familiar with that. In fact, they met this morning, and they're talking about it, and I already know of a couple of cool things that are going to happen. But it'll be the first Hash Bash where prohibition is lifted. And that's really special, and that's going to be pointed out. John Sinclair will be there, and it's going to be special.
Mm-hmm. Tell everyone who John Sinclair is in 3 sentences.
Well, John Sinclair is the reason that Hash Bash exists. Long ago, he passed 2 joints and received a sentence for 10 years. There was a big uproar. His case, people such as John Lennon, Yoko Ono, MC5, Patti Smith came out and rallied on his behalf. He got out. His case went to the Supreme Court. They said things like, "Of course, cannabis isn't as bad as alcohol. We can't treat it with these bad, For a while, there was no laws against cannabis in Michigan in the 70s because of John Sinclair's case. And the rally on the campus of the University of Michigan started, which is Hash Bash. And since that time, there's been laws, and there's been a lot of, and in fact, today as we celebrate, there are still people who are under prosecution, who are in jail right now for doing the stuff that we're allowed to do right now.
Right.
And we need to rectify that ultimately too, and take a minute during the celebration and reflect on the fact that that is still a reality.
Definitely.
And expungement and things like that are hopefully coming up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think Governor-elect Gretchen Whitmer has definitely said she'll consider what she can do within her powers to address those convicted of certain marijuana crimes who are serving prison sentence.
I like to think our legislators are sensible enough to understand that this is the next logical step. We've realized that they shouldn't have been illegal. Now we're recognizing that. So if you've suffered a crime under that, we should take it off.
There definitely are some bills pending that would do just that, but we'll see if they get through lame duck
Well,
with everything else
you brought up Senate Bill 1243 earlier.
Right.
That would essentially gut the heart of what we just passed and what many of us specifically worked for. It would keep the commercial business going on closer to what we've seen under the MMFLA, kind of would just completely parallel that program, but get rid of the micro opportunities, get rid of the ability for citizens to petition and have their own initiative on the issue if the local decision makers are deciding not to opt in. Get rid of the home grows that we've been discussing here, and those things are sacrosanct in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinion who have worked really hard on this over a long time. And so people can contact their state senator or their state house rep and let them know not to support Senate Bill 1243 in any form, and let this law play out. If there's an issue, it can be discussed, it can be debated, public input can be given, and then the lawmakers can make a decision whether or not to try to take a vote to amend the law. And that's how the process works. To immediately pass it and then to try to gut it like this, so deeply, is just an affront. It's an affront to democracy and to all the work that we've done to create this more sensible approach that was clearly approved by an overwhelming amount of our voting citizens.
Mm-hmm. That bill was introduced by outgoing State Senate Majority Leader Arlen Meekoff. He's a Republican.
He's term limited.
He's leaving, right? Yeah, at the end of the year. And the legislature did have an opportunity to actually pass their own version of this back in the summertime, but they
He
didn't
tried to
act by
spearhead
deadline,
that, and he
so
could not get the support for that.
They couldn't get the votes then. Yeah.
They were hoping they can't get the support for this either, and you would think that they shouldn't be able to. It's so incredibly un-American and anti-democratic that I would hope that there's not enough people to go along with this. Enough sensible Republicans and Democrats that wouldn't consider supporting something as ridiculous as this. But until we are assured that we're free from this threat, people really need to step up and make it known that as citizens we don't want this to happen. And you can contact your representatives and let them know that.
Let's go to a more lighthearted question. Can you smoke in your yard?
Well, again, I think that my discussion about the front porch could play
Right.
into this, depending on what the situation is with your yard and how it functionally interacts with the open public. I mean, are you basically is there just an imaginary line there, and you can see you smoking and smell it and talk to and things like that? Somebody might consider that not being private enough, even though you are on your private property. And somebody might consider. I think those are things that are going to have to be decided, and maybe that comes down to local tolerance. I'm not positive, but those have been legal questions over the years that I've noticed, and I'm sure play right into this discussion.
Right. Yeah, legal questions like that.
Like a parked car in a public parking lot, something like that is, has been through the courts, and as it turns out, they didn't like the fact that it was in a public spot that everybody could see what was going on, and even though it was within a little private bubble, it was too exposed to other things, so. There's no definitive answer on that. I would just be more private, and not expose it. But I also think that over time, no matter what, people get more used to this, understand the nature of it, and aren't as concerned, or it's not as sensational, and easing up a little bit and stepping out and being part of a normal social conversation while smoking a joint isn't going to be a big deal in the future.
Right.
But right now, this is new, Because we'd be happy it's legal.
Yeah.
For people like myself, as I said, I don't think there's going to be an influx of users. But for people like myself who do enjoy cannabis, I appreciate not having to look over my shoulder, to simply, participate in using cannabis.
So I think some of those legal questions about what is your backyard allowed, is your backyard public, is your front porch public, and how you could possibly, legislate around that locally. I feel like those are part of the questions that a lot of local communities have come up with as they've tried to grapple with the action that they can take after the passage of Proposal 1. Have you been surprised at the number of communities that have decided to ban or temporarily ban businesses?
Well, it's unnecessary. I'm not sure if I'm surprised because the Healthy Productive Michigan, led by Scott Greenlee, have clearly stated in the information that they put out to their members that they're trying to work with these communities to opt out, and they're I believe being deceiving in trying to suggest to them that if they don't opt out, that they won't be able to prevent this type of commercial activity from unfolding. But it does not work like that. If the local community wants this activity, they have to choose it. They have to decide which licenses that they want to issue, if not all of them, and then how many of them, where they should be zoned. And Andrew Brisboe stated this. Rick Thompson and I put on a series of conferences called Michigan Cannabis Business Development, MICBD conferences. Most recent one was in Lansing, December 2nd, and Andrew Brisboe was one of our speakers, and he is the head of the Bureau for Medical Marijuana Regulations. And that the department is going to be tasked with implementing the rules for this new system as well. So they have considered it, and somebody asked him, what are you going to do if somebody applies? He very clearly said the state will make sure that the locals have created zoning and an ordinance and accepted this activity before they issue their license.
Right.
So it's a misnomer that he's getting, Scott Greenlee and company are getting out there, and people are responding to it to create some possibly some controversy or some confusion early on or something. But but all those communities have plenty of time to change their mind and can change their mind, and the citizens can step up and help change their mind for them if they'd like to.
Right.
So over time, I suspect that many of those places, even opting out now, will come online and get with the program. I mean, they certainly bar themselves from any of the benefits that are available. They might look around and see other people benefiting from it and decide they want to get in on that too at the bare minimum.
Right. Yeah, the unique part to this particular recreational law compared to the medical law is that under the recreational system, citizens can petition to, I guess, change the local approach to marijuana. They can put a ballot petition out there to overturn a ban on retail sales or retail business license in their city or township, which is something that people can't do right now for medical marijuana bans. Is that right?
Well, they can do it right now in cities like that have incorporated under the Home Rules Act. There is the initiative process built in, but the what we just passed for legalization includes the ability for those places normally, a lot of townships and villages normally unable to participate in that petition initiative process, can do it for this purpose. And I suspect we're going to see a lot of it over the next couple of years, and some focus on the micro businesses and the micro gardens, which don't require having an MMFLA license first. So as a point of interest, in order to get the same 5 licenses, essentially, or a version of the same 5 licenses that exist in MMFLA, also exists in the business or commercial part of the legalization program. And in order to get one of those, for up to the first 2 years, one must first have the MMFLA license. But that's not the case for the micro opportunities. So a lot of people are going to be interested in the small business approach, I think, because they can get started on it without having to have gone through the difficult things necessary to get that MMFLA license.
Right. So yeah, let's talk about retail sales. Do you think you'd see them earlier than 2020 in Michigan, or is that kind of our target year right now?
I think for sure we'll see them in 2020 if the state comes up with rules earlier than later, and that's possible. They've already built a lot of the infrastructure that will probably be applied to this new system, so that saves some time.
Right.
And we have people who are a little bit more, in my opinion, sensible on the issue in positions of power in terms of our new Attorney General, Dana Nessel, and our new Governor, Gretchen Whitmer. That could help out. They set the tone. The previous Attorney General has not been in favor, has been in opposition of our law, and it's caused a lot of issues with implementation and the ability to really realize what its intent is. And so with people who are not willing to do that, I think we might see some things work a little bit better and faster than they could. And so if things line up perfectly, maybe before 2020 it's possible, but for sure in 2020 we'll see those sales, and certainly a lot more.
Sure. Yeah. Well, the licensing process is a little different. For medical right now, you have to go through probably the most stringent background check and screening in state government to get a license.
And it has a review board with the ability for people to make subjective determinations about somebody's moral character or some other type of behavior, or make assumptions about an old bank account or something, whatever they choose to think is an issue that's beyond the scope of really what the point of the review board is. And that has helped slow things down as well, and we eliminate that in the approach here. And of course, Senate Bill 1243 would seek to line it back up with that unproductive, more restrictive system, and another good reason to be in opposition and to ask your representatives who could have that decision in front of them to not be in support of it either.
Right. I mean, potentially, because any license for a recreational marijuana business would be reviewed just by the state licensing department and regulators. It potentially would be a much faster process to launch instead of going through an appointed board.
Right, they are charged to do it, but the parameters they do it within are much more confined, and so it's a more simple process. They rubber stamp those who meet the requirements.
So here's a good question. I think it fits into what we're talking about. So is there room in the law right now to allow medical marijuana provisioning centers to sell to recreational users?
No.
No, there's no mechanism to do that. And it's my understanding that legislatively action would have to be taken to allow that to...
You'd have to change the law in order to allow that.
To change the law, right. I've had some advocates tell me that instead of pursuing measures to cut up the law, then instead the legislature could be focusing on ways to make marijuana more accessible to recreational users. But that's something that would would require a 3/4 majority of both houses, just like any change to the law. And I don't know if that has not been introduced.
Now we have this lame duck stuff. There's many things flying around, and what comes out of it, we'll have to see at the end of the whole process. Mm-hmm. But certainly into the next legislative session, speaking with a lot of the lawmakers, this issue is going to be predominant. Mm-hmm. And there will be some attempts at some reasonable companion bills, maybe some reasonable amendments to make things more functional and to carry out better, the intent.
Yeah.
And of course there will be opposition trying to do the other side, but there's some sensible ground there that I think can be achieved with this new composition of lawmakers that will offer up the type of discussions and debates and determinations that will make for something that we can kind of live with, as opposed to just pure obstructionist kind of changes, mm-hmm. which some people are seeking, obviously.
Yeah, I mean, definitely in other states where marijuana has become legalized after there's been a medical program, there have been allowances in other states for dispensaries or provisioning centers to do just that. So it's not unheard of. It's just a matter of political will and opinion. So there certainly will be a whole new set of opinions in Lansing coming in January. So let's see. I think we should maybe talk about driving with marijuana next, because I feel like that's a big area. That's been a big area of concern for a lot of people during the campaign season. I heard a lot of concerns from people about, how will this be policed? How will we know, right, if somebody is
the fact that they're searching so hard to figure out how somebody's driving poorly with cannabis should tell you something about it, whether or not there's even an issue there to get started with. But,
right. Yeah.
But our law does not change anything to do with driving in cannabis. I mean, the police need to do their job, and if somebody's not driving properly for any reason, to be there to pull them over and investigate, determine what may be going on. I don't think we're ever going to have some kind of a number or something that from some test that's going to
like a legal limit situation.
I don't think scientifically that's ever going to be satisfied to be able to adequately cover if somebody is absolutely under some influence that's allowing them to or disallowing them to drive properly. We don't change that. If somebody is driving improperly for any reason, they remain very vulnerable to law enforcement.
Right.
Should keep that in mind. If smoking cannabis makes one too tired or too dizzy in the head or something like that, then don't drive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, police are definitely looking right now. They look for any sign of impairment, and that's what they'd use to pull you over. They give you, from my understanding, just a roadside sobriety test, the same kind of walk the line test.
They do their job instead of relying on an unscientific test. Yeah, we prefer that. Yeah.
Right. There's definitely been a pilot of a roadside saliva test in 5 counties in Michigan that wrapped up this November, but we haven't seen the report out of Michigan State Police to see how effective that's been. It's been kind of questionable in other states. Can you talk a little bit about why roadside saliva tests or any kind of test for marijuana while driving is kind of subjective or misleading?
Well, I mean, there's presence. There's presence when the THC is active, but no matter what, there is how it works with the individual and how the individual is actually in real life affected by the consumption of cannabis. And for some people, it does not affect their driving. And for some people some people claim they drive better if they've used some cannabis in a particular way. Mm-hmm. But if somebody, whether again through cannabis use or any other reason, is uncomfortable or can't adequately drive, they ought not drive. There's a level of personal responsibility there. Mm-hmm. But there's been a few studies, and there's more to come, I'm sure, as more legalization happens. And I don't think we've determined cannabis in isolation is necessarily causing an issue. People ought to be responsible. I'm not implying anything. It doesn't do anything or whatever. But I don't think there's cause for great concern over that issue.
Yeah. If the police pull you over and they want to charge you with driving under the influence, I believe they request that you do a blood test, and if you refuse, they subpoena you, and so they force you to take a blood test.
And then says you have cannabis in your system, and then what does that necessarily prove?
Right. It does stay with you for longer than alcohol would. And it's hard to tell when you used it. Let's make sure I have everything else. I guess the only other question I have is, can you have medical and recreational marijuana at home at the same time? And what legal limit do you find?
Right. Well, I mean, I would like to say it's not an issue, and you can exercise what you're afforded under the medical marijuana program for whichever type of licensing you may have, and then you can add your, adult right to have cannabis as well. However, to assume that it might be a little risky, and it might be one of the things that needs to be clarified eventually. So I would say until there's better clarification by the Attorney General or through a change in law or the court making an opinion or something like that, people should probably take one or the other and not exceed the limits of either one. Although there was never any intent in drafting to limit the rights, in any particular area, but this is a discussion that's been had, and there are real concerns there. So I wouldn't advise anybody just to assume it's okay.
Right.
There might be a good argument if somebody saw that you were doing that, but then again, there might not. So don't be the one who figures that out through the courts.
Yeah. Well, we're about out of questions. Is there anything else that you think people should be aware of today on Legalization Day in Michigan? Or any open questions that people should be aware of?
I think this is a celebratory day for the entire state. Whether people supported this or not, this is much better policy now. We are now taking a sensible approach to something that we have not taken a sensible approach to for a very long time. And everybody will benefit from this in one way or the other. And if you're not celebrating today, you should.
That's fun.
And I will continue to celebrate today, for sure.
All right, well, that was Jamie Lowell. He was one of the authors of Proposal 1 and board member of MLive. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm Amy Biocchini, reporter with MLive, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you very much.